Amanda's and Keith's relationship had gotten bad before, but never this bad. She nibbled a fingernail nervously, feeling Keith's stare boring into her back. She resisted the urge to glance back at him. "You could at least say something," she snapped aloud, but no response came. So, this was stonewalling. He'd not spoken a word to her in 3 days. She was keeping track. She winced as the pen rubbed a blister on her hand. "Silent bastard," she muttered as she scribbled in her journal, her anger welling up again. They'd been fighting a lot more. They'd spent 2 years happily together, but ever since Keith's brother died in that motorcycle accident, both of their emotions had been all over the place. Him brooding and sulking around the house, her exploding when he'd swerve her questions and prods to pull himself out of it. It was insufferable that he just wouldn't ever talk to her half of the time besides his incessant excuses. And now, this new strategy that Keith was employing. Silence and staring. She shivered. She had to admit it was becoming effective. Nothing she couldn't ignore at first. But he was relentless. Much to her surprise. He usually would have apologized by now. And if she kept leaving her writing desk, well, then he'd win, wouldn't he? He'd know he was getting to her. She hated losing. This was always his biggest complaint of her. Always had to get in the last word, or would fight to the bitter end even when she knew he was right. Her stomach growled and she licked her dry lips. His work phone rang again. Obviously, his boss was wondering where he was. Amanda grimaced. At least she had the decency to call in sick, unlike Keith. Had she always felt this much animosity towards him? She rubbed her tired eyes as she tried to make sense of it all. Usually they'd fight, he'd apologize, and they make up. Then life was good until something set them off again. Usually her. Little things he'd say or do would set her off these days. And he was becoming more vicious with his words right back at her. She could tell he was fed up with her temper. They were becoming spiteful. Maybe they should talk to a therapist. He especially set her off on Friday. It was supposed to be a good night for them, just relaxing. But the kitchen was a mess again, and of course, Keith was in that damn chair, engrossed in whatever it was he was sinking his consciousness into nowadays when it all became too much. Drunk again. She spun around. "Would you just talk to me?" she screamed at him, immediately regretting giving him a small win. Again, silence. The kitchen knife in his throat glinted a bit in the sunlight, and his bloated corpse slumped back into his favorite chair, his lifeless eyes staring back at her. Maybe he'd finally respond to her tomorrow.